The New York Times, your newspaper, reporting now that President Trump, quote, told a crowd of staff from the United States mission to the United Nations that he wants to know who provided information to the whistleblower about his phone call with the president of Ukraine, saying that whoever did so was close to a spy, quote, close to a spy, and that, quote, in the old days, spies were dealt with differently. What do we know about this? What's the implication here?
That's right. This is new reporting by my colleague Maggie Haberman. And what it appears to have happened is that Trump was up in New York today as part of the UN General Assembly effort. And he spoke behind closed doors to a group of diplomats, almost all of whom, except for the ambassador to the United Nations herself, are longtime career diplomats, not political appointees. Notwithstanding that audience, he went after whoever it was in the White House who had told the whistleblower about his phone call to the Ukraine president in July, the one we all saw the reconstructed transcript of yesterday, and implied that this person was or those people, the sources to the whistleblower, were traitors, and hinted that they should be shot, essentially, if that's how we used to deal with traitors.
Richard Painter, that's entirely amazing. In a world that nothing amazes anybody anymore, that's something else. I mean, the whole point of protecting whistleblowers is so that they can feel safe, usually from persecution, usually from losing their job. Generally speaking, in 2019, the protection shouldn't be that someone gets shot for telling you that there's a national security concern in the White House.
Well, this president is psychologically deranged, and it's going to get worse as Congress closes in. We're already dealing with a president who refers to the press as the enemy of the people. That's language that was used by Adolf Hitler in his campaigns in 1932. This is a dangerous man, Donald Trump, and he's going to get more dangerous. He's referring to a whistleblower as a spy. He refers to Democrats as enemies of the people. He continues to violate the Constitution. And now he's going to try and drag Mike Pence into this. And Mike Pence may very well be culpable. But Donald Trump is turning on his vice president and pointing to him and maybe sending a message to the Senate Republicans that if he's asked to resign, he may take Pence with him. This is a very dangerous situation for our country right now. And it is amazing that we continue to let this man be in charge of nuclear weapons and they have the ability to start a war.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.